Buongiorno a tutti, sono Alesia Preite, un'ex alunna del collegio Ghislieri. Sono entrata in Ghislieri nel 2012 e mi sono laureata in filosofia nel 2017, anno in cui ho iniziato il mio dottorato di ricerca presso l'Università di Oxford, dove sto ancora svolgendo il mio dottorato, sono al quarto anno. Attualmente sono anche visiting scholar alla Ludwig Maximilian Universität di Monaco. La mia tesi di ricerca verte sulla psicologia e l'epistemologia nel Timeo di Platone e oggi vi presenterò una breve parte che si occupa della percezione del cosmo. Prima di iniziare vorrei ringraziare il collegio Ghislieri per tutte le incredibili opportunità che mi ha dato, tra cui quella di arrivare a fare il dottorato a Oxford e anche adesso di svolgere un periodo di ricerca qua a Monaco, in cui ero stata nel 2014 grazie a uno scambio col collegio Ghislieri, e soprattutto per darmi l'opportunità di presentare parte della mia ricerca nel contesto di questa bellissima iniziativa Non fermiamo la cultura, che credo sia fondamentale in questo momento drammatico della nostra storia. La mia presentazione è in inglese perché la mia tesi è scritta in inglese e anche questa parte, che probabilmente verrà sviluppata in un paper a sé stante, è scritta in inglese. Ora condividerò il mio schermo con voi e andrò a presentarvi le mie slide. Grazie per l'attenzione in anticipo. So, the title of my thesis is Does the Universe Perceive? And a minimalist account of perception in the Timaeus. So, first of all, why is does the universe perceive a relevant question at all? It is related to the model relationship that holds between the word soul and human soul, on which much of my thesis is focused. And my claim in this particular part of the thesis, in this paper, is that if the word soul were not to partake in perception, it would result in a less apt model for human souls. So I argue mainly against Klaus Corsilius, who published a paper on cosmic cognition in the Timaeus in 2019. So he argues that the word soul has access to things in the cosmos despite being deprived of the faculty of perception. So I have many reasons to disagree with his overall view of cosmic cognition, but among the many reasons why I believe he fails to explain why the word soul, cognitive activity, should be a model for human cognitive activity, which is a crucial aspect of the Timaeus, is the fact that he denies the word soul has the faculty of perception. So I will consider as subject of perception interchangeably both the cosmos and the word soul, and I will do so for the rest of my presentation. I think this is not problematic, given that Plato often refers either as the entire organism as the subject of perception or just as the soul, both in the Timaeus and in other dialogues. So I have two reasons to suspect that the word soul perceives. The first one is to be found in T1, passage, which is part of one of the passages on which my thesis is all about, and where I will briefly read out the part in bold. Whenever such an account becomes about what is perceptible, so perito aisteton, and the circle of the different running right reports it to the whole soul, then there arise opinions and convictions that are stable and true. So the word soul, in virtue of the activity of its circle of the different, the word soul is composed of a circle of the same and a circle of the different, is said to produce opinions and convictions, so doxa kaipistes, in relation to what is perceptible, perito aisteton. So my claim contra Corsilius is that in order to produce this doxa concerning what is perceptible, the word soul must be considered as having the faculty of perception. So I know that my claim and Corsilius' claims are both compatible with this particular text. However, I think that my suspicion, initial suspicion, on which I will elaborate in the rest of the paper, is backed up by the overall epistemological framework of the dialogue. So there are two passages from Timaeus' prologue and one passage from the second part of the dialogue, both where Timaeus lays out the epistemology underlying his discourse, where Timaeus says that in order to grasp becoming, which is in turn equated with what is perceptible, one needs doxa metaisis, so opinion with perception. So, and my claim is that doxa, at least one concerning what is perceptible, some people think that doxa might also be concerned with mathematical objects or forms. I have absolutely believe that, but that's not something that is relevant for my thesis here, requires hypothesis. Right, so I think that I'm facing a challenge here because the risk is just giving two accounts of perception in the Timaeus. One, which is tailored to humans, and one to the cosmos. And then one possible move would simply calling them both perception. And I think that's a real risk, and I'm working for avoiding the possibility of facing it. So my aim instead is giving an account of perception that holds throughout the Timaeus, and that can be applied to the cosmos, so to the universe, as well as to human and non-human animals. So the Timaeus doesn't say much about perception of non-human animals, but I think they would be included in my account, and quite astonishingly to plants. So to do that, I first look a bit at the Timaeus and the Philebus, in particular the Kona passage of the Timaeus, and at the following brief passage of the Philebus, where I believe we can find some form of definition of perception. So Socrates in the Philebus says, when soul and body jointly undergoing one affection, so a pathos, are jointly moved, it would surely be right to call this movement perception. So in the light of the Kona passage of the Timaeus and this brief text from the Philebus, I elaborated my minimalist account of perception, according to which there are 4 necessary conditions that need to be met for an instance of ISIS to occur. And the strategy of the paper is that to show that if the cosmos can meet all of them, then we can say that the cosmos perceives. So the first necessary requirement is that there is a body. So in the Timaeus, sensory organs are those by means of which one perceives. However, I will argue that what is needed is just a body and not sensory organs. Then we need a soul, that with which one perceives according to the Timaeus account, and the possibility that perception could just sit in the body as if in wooden horses, as the Timaeus says, without reaching the soul is something which is rejected in the Timaeus. And as we will see also in the Timaeus, the soul is required for becoming aware of the affections coming from the body. And an affection, so pathos, pathema, I think are used interchangeably in all these 3 dialogues under consideration. It leads to emotion or change, a kinesis, in the body and in the soul. And I believe that's what T2 shows, and I don't believe that koine jointly in T2 should be considered meaning at the same time, but I believe that actually first the body and then the soul are affected in the process of perception. Then we need a cause of this affection. Mostly this will be something external to the body in all dialogues I'm looking at, but my claim is that it might be the body itself. So I believe that we should leave open the possibility that for Plato would be okay to accept the existence of self-perception, although he doesn't discuss it in any details in the dialogues. So the fact that bodily pleasure and pains are considered perception, for instance, in the Timaeus, seems to suggest that. So there is an instance in the Philebus where Socrates talks about the perception of feeling as something in one's body, so being filled. And this seems to be something that we perceive, but that doesn't have a cause external to our body. So now let's turn to my dialogue, to the Timaeus. I believe it confirms and fleshes out with many physiological, very difficult actually details, the account that I just laid out. And by discussing how the Timaeus adds to that account, I will also try to show that in the Timaeus there is room to ascribe perception to the cosmos. So I am bringing in T3, which is a very strange passage on plants, where plants are said to have a physis syngenes to our nature, akin to our nature, and where plants are ascribed the third part of the soul, the appetitive part, and also perception, so aesthesis. So my claim is that the case of plants shows that for having aesthesis, a body is a necessary requirement. Plants surely have a body, but a body with sense organs, with obviously the plants do not have, or for what matter flesh, which is also important for our human perception, is not. So by bringing in plants, I argue that the word body can meet requirement 1. So there are objections against this. So the first one is that what we read in T3 is that pleasurable and painful aesthesis are ascribed to the universe, and they can are ascribed to plants, and they cannot be ascribed to the universe. I believe that's true. So the universe is described as living a blessed and happy life, which I think would not really be very compatible with the very bad press that pleasure and pains receive in Plato's dialogues. However, I believe that the case of plants makes the scope of application of the term perception is clear. And I believe that plants and the cosmos are two limiting cases of perception at somehow the opposite ends of the spectrum, as we will see at the end of my presentation. So the other objection one could make is that those theses at the beginning of T3 are said to be ally, so different. And some people might say that a radically different kind of perception is ascribed to plants. So my reply relies on a very interesting article by Amber Carpenter, who discusses the passage at length and argues that, but still they're called theses, and that plants are said to have the third part of the soul, not something just similar to it. Moreover, I think what is important here, to notice here is that the syngeneia relationship, so this fact of being akin, holds between human and plants, as we read in T3, but also between humans and the cosmos and or the word soul, as we read in many passages from the Timaeus. So I believe that what Timaeus is doing is to set apart and soul beings from plants to human and non-human animals to the cosmos from inanimate ones. And I think this should make more plausible my idea that he holds an account of perception broad enough to apply to all these unsouled beings. So how does my minimalist account of perception fare vis-a-vis tripartition? So in the Timaeus, we have a particular form of tripartition. There is an immortal rational soul in the brain, which has a composition akin to the word soul. It's also made of divisible and indivisible beings, same and different, although these ingredients are less pure, and has the same structure as the word soul. So with a circle of the same and a circle of the different. Moreover, there is a mortal soul with a spirited part located around the heart and an appetitive part located around the abdomen. So there are many options in the literature. I won't go through all of them so in detail. So some people think the immortal rational part of the soul is necessary to have any instance of perception. Recently, or relatively recently, Lawrence argued that all three parts of the soul are always jointly required for having perception. According to Silverman and O'Brien, only the mortal part of the soul is required to have perception. And then there is a recent article by Fletcher who distinguishes between like-to-like aesthesis and mean-state aesthesis. So in my paper, I give reason to reject all of them, but in particular, I argue against three. So the idea that the mortal parts are necessary for having an instance of perception, because of course the cosmos, which is also only made of a word soul and a word body and doesn't have, so word soul, which is immortal and rational, of course, doesn't have mortal parts of the soul. So if they were necessary for having perception, that would be a problem for my interpretation. But I believe we have good reason for believing that that's not the case. So let's turn to my account, which is based, as all the other, on interpretation of T4, as also all the other accounts are. This is a very debated passage. And I will read out briefly the center of T4. So for what is naturally mobile, when affected by even a slight impulse, so pathos, spread its round, one part passing the same affection onto another, until it reaches tophronimon, the consciousness, according to my interpretation, and reports the quality of the agent. So the idea in this passage is, in order for an affection to become perceived, as opposed to remaining unperceived, anaestheta, as happens when hair or bone are affected, and that's in the last part of the passage, the emotion triggered by it needs to reach tophronimon. So what is tophronimon? I agree with O'Brien, I think brilliant analysis, that tophronimon indicates simply consciousness or awareness. However, my claim, unlike O'Brien, who thinks that tophronimon should be identified with the mortal parts of the soul, however, actually in his paper he might leave open another option which is closer to mine, but that's not clear. I believe tophronimon refers to soul in general, to soul generally speaking, as the only possible center of consciousness and awareness. And my idea is that the term is not meant to indicate any specific part of the soul. So I'm not claiming, as Lawrence does, that always all three parts of the soul are involved in perception, but some part of the soul, at least one of its parts, must be involved for becoming aware of an affection, a pathos, and thus having an instance of perception. I think my interpretation of has some advantages. So it is compatible with all the scenarios about which people have debated for so long, for which one can find evidence in the Timaeus. So where apparently only the mortal part of the soul is involved in perception, where apparently only the mortal parts of the soul are, and where all three seem to be involved. Therefore, it can apply to human and non-human animals, presumably, which have a tripartite soul, to plants, which, as we saw in the previous text in 3, have only the appetitive soul, and I will argue to the cosmos, where, of course, it would involve only its immortal and rational word soul. So I think the Timaeus also confirms the third requirement, that the path, the pathemata, are necessary for perception, and perception consists in a form of change, motion, so kinesis. So there are many instances in T4 and in other passages that we need an affection for having an aesthesis. And then there is a passage, T6, where, again, as in T2 from the Philebus, we seem to find a sort of definition of perception also. Some form of etymological remark seems to be made here. So Proclus has something to say about it. It's not clear what is the etymology amounts to. Anyway, I will briefly read out T6. So the motion by all these affections were transmitted to the body and attack the soul. And for this reason were later called as destillar perception. So also here, a perception seems to be a kinesis. Right. The fourth requirement, the cause of this affection. So I will go back to T4, the central part of it, where it says that affection reaches the tophronimon and reports the quality, dynamis, of the agent, topoiesantos. So I believe that topoiesan or topoion here is an external object of which the soul recognizes the dynamis. So the sensory quality of a certain object affecting the body in a certain way. And I recognize that at Timaeus 61 to 68, so the physiological passage where perception is discussed and that I am looking at, the pathemata, so the affection, are all caused by external objects. However, my claim is that topoiesan or topoion in certain cases could be the body itself. The body must be acted upon by something which acts on it, that's a clear requirement, but if that doesn't need to be something external to the perceiving body. So, and again, I think my claim might be supported by the fact that in the same section of the Timaeus, and in particular at 64 to 65, pleasures and pains are considered aesthesis. So I do not believe that the cosmos perceives pleasures, pains, as I already said when discussing plants, also because it is not clear what the content of pleasure and pain is and how they could be what the true and stable doxa kaipistes we read at the beginning of my presentation in T1 could be about them, so that's not clear. But the fact that the pleasure and pains fall under the account of perception, and that clearly we can have pleasure and pain which are not caused by something external to our body, as I said by discussing the perception of feeling or I don't know, having a headache or something like that, suggests that there is room for self-perception in the conception of aesthesis of the Timaeus. So I don't see why Plato or Timaeus in this case would rule the possibility of having pleasure and pain caused by something which is not external to the body, but which is the body itself. And therefore, if they are aesthesis, why he should not leave open also the possibility of self-perception. So let's turn to the cosmos, the universe. I think it meets condition 1 and 2, the fact that we need a body and a soul for having an self-perception in virtue of the fact that it has a word body and a word soul that are joined together by the demiurge, created and then joined together by the demiurge. What I need to prove in the final part of this presentation is that the cosmos satisfies also 3 and 4. So the context is the following. To make the word body, the demiurge uses all the 4 Empedoclean elements in their entirety, leaving nothing outside the word body. So there is nothing outside the word body. T7 is crucial for my interpretation, and I will analyze it in turn. So T7 reason to Timaeus is explaining why the word body has this perfect spherical and smooth shape. So in the first part of the passage, we read that it had no need of eyes, as there remained nothing visible outside it, nor of hearing, as there remained nothing audible. So outside is exoten, and I think we might read exoten also as being applied also after akuston. And so the typical understanding of A is that perception is denied to the cosmos. My claim is that one can interpret exoten as an indication that there is nothing to see and hear outside, but what is inside the word body might still be perceived, although of course not seen and heard. I think, so yeah, what about the other senses? So surely, or the word body doesn't have, or the universe doesn't have a taste or smell either, as the word body is denied to have a nose or mouth, but it might have a perception common to the whole body. So those are different from the common perception of Aristotle, the anima, And they are discussed at Timaeus 61 to 64, so before pleasure and pain, always in this physiological section of the second part of the dialogue, and are identified as those of hot and cold, soft and hard, light and heavy, smooth and wrinkled. Some people think they kind of identify with the form of touch, but I think that's probably not the case, and anyway, touch is not thematized in the Timaeus. So there is the possibility that the word body might have perception common to the whole body, although probably different from those listed in Timaeus, insofar as they cannot be caused by an external environment. But I believe that it might have something falling under the label of perception common to the whole body. So I think that in B, always of T7, we find a possible parallel with nutrition and digestion. So I think T7 actually has a chiastic structure. So first, external perception is denied. So as we have seen, there is nothing to see and to hear. So there are no eyes nor ears. But then external respiration and nutrition are also denied. So the word body doesn't need to breathe or to take in food. After that, however, it is made explicit that the word body deals itself with its own nourishment and decay. Betek has a recent article on that. It's a very difficult passage, but there seemed to be a reference to some form of self-nutrition and self-digestion with which the word body is said to be autarkic, would deal itself by itself. And finally, we find the crucial clause, panten auto, kaififato pason kaidron, in C, which I will analyze in a second, which I believe, as I'm about to show, prove that the word body contributes to cosmic self-perception. So this chiastic structure might further suggest that the word body plays a role in cosmic self-perception, as it does in self-nutrition and self-digestion. So external perception is denied, and external respiration and nutrition are denied as well, but perhaps self-nutrition and digestion and self-perception are instead possible. So I believe that in C, we find the fact that there is this passion, so the cosmos said to suffer. So, and I believe this passion ensures that condition 3, being affected, is met in the case of the word body. It is affected, and this must imply some form of chaining. Of course, and making sure kinesis is involved. The word body is moved by the word, so, and surely a lot of movements are going on there. But I believe also the last condition in that, so 4, insofar as we learn that it is suffered and does everything in itself and by itself. So drawn shows that the word body also acts. I think drao and poieo in this case can be considered as interchangeable. So going back to T4 where we had topoies and topoion. And the thing that acts upon the word body, and of which its word soul can recognize the dynamis, is the word body itself. So the idea is that panten autoka hyphoto suggests that hypo has a causal force. What the word body suffers and does is in itself and is caused by itself. So the word body would be the cause of its own affections, thereby, allowing the universe as a whole to meet also the last requirement for having an instance of perception. So this is my conclusive claim. This clause proves that the cosmos in C proves that the cosmos satisfies also the necessary condition of 3 and 4. Thereby, I believe, showing the existence of the self-perception of the cosmos. So I actually would like to conclude with a question showing that this is still work in progress, of course. So the one thing is to establish the possibility that the cosmos might have perception, and giving reason to suggest against Corsilius that we should not rule it out in principle. So I believe I hope to have achieved, at least to have convinced you that there is this possibility, that it's not crazy. However, then it's a different story to really exactly picture what's going on. What is the self-perception of the universe? So is it that different parts of the word body act on one another are acted upon, perhaps in turn and interchangeably, or that the word body as a whole affects and is affected by the word body as a whole, which seems to be the direction which, for instance, Fronterota goes. So I think the answer to this question is made particularly difficult because there are many ways to think of the word body. It's difficult to picture it. It's made of the 4 elements, which in turn are actually a Platonic polyhedra, but it's also composed of the fixed stars, the planets and the earth, which are moved by the word soul. So this makes the answer to this question difficult. I would like to conclude with a provisional answer. So I believe that T1, so the text we started about the cognition of the word soul, suggests that it is not the case that it is the word body as a whole as a single undivided entity that acts and is acted upon itself. So I would rule out, so provisionally at least option B, but I believe it is more plausible that different parts of it act and are acted upon, so that they would transmit a wide range of different information to the word soul, which will become aware of these affections. And I think that's clear from the passage right from the sentence right before Q1, when the soul is said to a fact type, things that are divisible being. So they would transmit with this wide range of information to the word soul, which would have perceptual awareness of them, and on which it would base its true and stable doxa capistis, so opinions and convictions, which is plural. So, and this might suggest why I think there are different parts involved. So, grazie mille. I would, ok, sì, scusate per quest'ultimo problema tecnico, vorrei ancora, spero sia stato chiaro, è solo una piccola parte della mia tesi di dottorato, appunto, soprattutto l'ultima sezione è ancora work in progress, so ne discuto con i miei supervisor sia a Oxford che qua a Monaco, però spero vi abbia dato un'idea del tipo di lavoro che sto conducendo e che abbia insomma dato l'impressione di dato del mio contributo per appunto non fermare la cultura. Grazie ancora al collegio Ghislieri, oltre che appunto per tutte le opportunità che mi ha dato finora, anche per avermi permesso di partecipare a questa bellissima iniziativa, e arrivederci e grazie per l'attenzione ancora.